Good morning, all. I'm Trevor James Bond, the co-director of the Center for Digital Scholarship and Curation. We acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional homelands of the Palouse Band of Indians and the ceded lands of the Nez Perce tribe. We further acknowledge their presence here since time immemorial and recognize their continuing connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. So welcome this morning to the CDSC Spring Symposium. This year's symposium is entitled Multiplayer, Critical Perspectives on Video Games and Online Environments. Acknowledging that virtual worlds replicate the social values of their creators is a small part of the 2017-2018 WSU Common Reading book Ready Player One. This occurs briefly when one of the characters reveals that offline they are definitely nothing like their online avatar, and they did this to embody a more privileged space in the oasis, the virtual world at the core of the story. The same goal, to complicate games and online environments, is something that the speakers for this symposium are all interested in doing in their scholarship and praxis. The presenters will critique, interrupt, and challenge gameplay so that our digital future does not simply replicate and reinforce the inequity of our analog past. Before we introduce the first speaker today, I wanted to thank the sponsors for this event for their contributions. The Center for Digital Scholarship and Curation, WSU Libraries, Native American Programs, English Department, History Department, Asia Program, Sociology Department, and Critical Culture, Gender, and Race Studies Department. And a special acknowledgement to Ruth Gregory, sitting in the second row, who organized this whole event. Dr. Megan Condis completed her PhD at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Her forthcoming book, Gaming Masculinity, Trolls, Fake Geeks, and the Gendered Battle for Online Culture, examines the way video game fans compose their identities online. She is a regular contributor to Unwinnable. She also serves as a member of the editorial board for Resilience, a journal of environmental humanities, and the Journal of Gaming and Virtual Worlds. She writes about gender and popular culture on her blog at megancondis@wordpress.com and on Twitter. She also recently retired from mixed martial arts after breaking her hand during a bout in the octagon. After Dr. Condis' talk, there will be a short Q&A. We have viewers online, so please use the microphones provided to ask questions. And if you enjoy this talk this morning, please stick around because there is a lot more greatness to come. You also might want to check out Dr. Condis' introductory workshop to the interactive storytelling tool Twine this afternoon from 3:30 to 5:30 in the Kamiak room, which is a hidden space on the other end of this floor. Also, the restrooms are around the corner, and I encourage you during a break to admire the pristine mid-century modern tile in those bathrooms. Without further ado, please enjoy the talk.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Megan Condis, and I'm here today to talk to you about Ready Player One. So, spoiler alert, for those of you watching on the internet, to avoid spoilers, skip to another video because the whole thing is going to be spoilers. So, for those of you who haven't read the novel or who haven't seen the trailers for the forthcoming movie, Ready Player One is an award-winning novel that is set in a dystopian near future where people try to escape the poverty and the environmental destruction of our near future by disappearing into the online space, the Oasis. When the creator of the Oasis passes away, he leaves behind no heirs, and so he decides to start this giant contest, which he calls an Easter egg hunt. An Easter egg is a hidden piece of content in a video game that's tough to find and that oftentimes is a way for the creator to kind of insert their signature into the video game. And so Halliday says that the person who finds his Easter egg hidden in the Oasis will, kind of Willy Wonka style, inherit his corporation and become like the new king of the online realm. And so our main character, Wade, decides that he is going to take on this quest for himself. And he has arrayed against him the employees of a global communications conglomerate called IOI, or Innovative Online Industries. And IOI decides that they are going to try to essentially do a hostile takeover of the Oasis by sending their employees into the virtual space to hunt for the egg. And Wade fears that if they are successful, then they will corrupt the inclusiveness and the utopianness of this online space, probably by throwing up paywalls or destroying net neutrality or introducing loot boxes or whatever it is that people are afraid are going to happen in these online spaces. And so Wade kind of stands for the everyman, the avatar, I guess you might say, of the reader, the everyday geek who's arranged against these massive forces. So as I said, a movie is coming out shortly, directed by Steven Spielberg. So here we have a picture of Wade in his array of virtual reality gear. We have the representatives of IOI. They're all just sort of corporate drones getting thrown into the virtual world. Okay, so Ready Player One is kind of notorious for being a nostalgia fest. So in the world of the story, the creator of the Oasis is obsessed with 80s pop culture, so things like Back to the Future, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, like all of these sort of classic touchstones that are a part of the canon of geek culture. And so the movie and the book are kind of like a nostalgia fest. It's packed full with references and I guess you might call them Easter eggs, where attentive readers can pick up on riffs related to some of these other texts. And so as a person who works in an English department, that was really exciting to me because it was all about intertextuality and how you approach a text as a reader. And if you're successful in decoding the text, then you can win this prize and be a capitalist success, which means maybe English degrees are good on the job market in the distant future. So that's exciting. But the question I think we need to ask ourselves is, whose nostalgia are we diving into? And in this world of the utopian oasis, who counts as a representative of gamer culture? Who counts as the everyman avatar that we are going to root for to succeed? And I think that this question is really important, not just because I'm an English teacher and so I like to decode novels, but because we're in this time period where gamification is being instituted in education, in the corporate world. We're all connected to social media and we're kind of starting to gamify our relationships with other people. And so if games are going to become this cultural touchstone, then we need to interrogate who is being invited into the gaming space, who counts as a real gamer versus which of us are going to be relegated to the kind of bad guy status of the interlopers or the invaders into that space. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So, the hunt for Halliday's egg is, as I said a little bit earlier, a reading exercise. The game requires you to hone your interpretive talents, not your run and gun, trigger finger, quick reflex talents. And so in the Oasis, if you are going to be successful in finding the Easter egg, it means that you have to demonstrate your devotion to old school video game culture and kind of follow the breadcrumbs of hints relating to those past texts. The trailer for the forthcoming movie, for example, is riddled with these types of Easter eggs, and they're sort of there for people sitting in the theater to be able to gasp and point and say, I know who that is, and that is like a mark of status of the viewer. Within Wade's world, things operate very similarly. So James Halliday, the creator of the Oasis, who kind of initiated this quest, has a journal where he discusses his love of all of these pop culture texts, and that journal constitutes kind of like the Rosetta Stone of the Oasis. It's the space where Halliday marks which texts are important and therefore perhaps connected with finding the Easter egg, and which texts are peripheral. So we could say in English that this kind of keystone is constituting the canon or the syllabus of the Oasis, that it is kind of selecting and picking out from the huge swath of possible texts that we could be interpreting, which texts are worthy of interpretation. The canon that's compiled by Klein, Ernest Klein, the author of Ready Player One, and I guess the canon that's compiled within the world of Ready Player One by Halliday, reflects the particular historical and material conditions that shaped the origins of gamer culture. These conditions overwhelmingly favored the participation of college-educated white males over everyone else, because the first computer games were created in college laboratories in the 50s and 60s, where only a small part of the population, generally white male engineers, had access to the machines and had the comparative space in terms of like leisure time and money and access to be able to get to the machines, play with the machines, learn how to program the machines. So that means that this demographic, this white male demographic, kind of had a head start in the world of digital culture. The digital divide, the so-called digital divide that says who has access to the internet now, has essentially been closed. So statistics show that men and women are online in roughly equal numbers, but the early adopters, or the elite consumers represented by this white male demographic, are still kind of embedded in the popular imagination as what gamers look like. And it was actually really interesting. Over breakfast this morning, we were discussing how when we were flying into Washington State and we were in the airport, you could look around and see like Granny is on her phone playing Words with Friends, and little Timmy is on his iPad playing some kind of like Sesame Street colors and shapes game, and people are playing all kinds of Candy Crushes and Peggles and things on their phones, and those people are playing video games. But if you ask someone to imagine what does a gamer look like, you get this very specific picture of like an adolescent white male with like maybe some acne and some greasy hair, and definitely not with a girl and living in their parents' basement. And we kind of chuckle at that image and say that that image is disenfranchised, but within the space of gamer culture, that is like the most privileged position. That is the position that is the mark of status of, we were here first, we developed this culture, and so if other people want to come play in our playground of the Oasis, then you kind of have to pay fealty to that demographic. The consequences of this divide are keenly felt in the video game industry as well, where programmers are overwhelmingly more likely to be white and male, at least within the sort of AAA games industry space. And there are sizable wage gaps between men and women. And also, male workers in the industry tend to heavily dominate the core creation roles, which would be like programming, graphic design, audio recording, whereas women in the industry statistically are often hired for the less technical positions like writing and public relations and marketing and community management. So in turn then, we have a predominance of white males at the origins of tech, which translates into a predominance of white males in the video game industry. And that turns into predominance of white males kind of being represented in the cast of those that we are portraying in the media as gamers, and also a predominance of white males in the games themselves. So even though right now African Americans and Hispanics play and purchase more video games than any other ethnic group in the US, and women are currently the fastest growing demographic of video game players, you still have this constant flood of white grizzled dudes with facial hair and sad backstories who dominate AAA releases as the heroes. So this history explains why the canon or the syllabus of Ready Player One is so demographically homogeneous. It is reflecting the historical and material conditions that gave rise to gamer culture, and it is relegating to the sidelines some of the developers who are exploring other stories outside of that core demographic. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily something we need to blame Ernest Cline for as an author. So Ernest Cline is writing about his favorite pop culture memories and kind of inviting us to be nostalgic with him. But I think it's really interesting that Ready Player One also gives us characters who don't fall into that demographic, like Artemis, the female egg hunter who Wade crushes on, and spoiler, this is where the spoilers come in, right? His best friend H, who it turns out is not another white adolescent dude, but is actually a black lesbian woman. And we discover that these people who are having to orbit around kind of planet white dude in the Oasis are not having the same kind of fun, nostalgic time as Wade and, by extension, Ernest Cline is having, because they're having to adapt themselves to fit within that experience that has been crafted for someone who is not like them. Okay. So, for example, one of the mini games within the Oasis that James Halliday has set up for the people who are hunting for his Easter egg is something that is called a flick sync. And a flick sync is like Guitar Hero for a movie. So you are inserted into a famous 80s pop culture movie. In this case, it's War Games with Matthew Broderick, which is great. And your job is to recreate the performance of your character within that world as accurately as possible. So it rewards recreating dialogue accurately, but also recreating the inflection of your voice or the gestures that you're performing. It's essentially asking the reader to not just kind of consume the text, but to physically embody the text. And in this case, it's literal. So within the flick sync, Wade finds his normal avatar transformed into an avatar of Matthew Broderick. And when he looks into the mirror of the arcade machine that he's playing, he sees Matthew Broderick's face looking back at him. And he immediately understands what's required of him then. So I have to embody this character and perform the lines correctly, but also occupy the space as that character would. A little later on in the novel, we find out that Artemis has gone through the same exercise when she encountered this puzzle. And she expresses some regret because when she was inserted into the flick sync, she too was inserted into Matthew Broderick's character. And she says at one point, you know, I would have loved to have been put into the Ali Sheedy character and still act out the same movie, but I would have loved to do it looking through the eyes of the character who I identify with. And in the Oasis, that is not an option that's given. You can choose to identify with and inhabit the position of the white guy, but any other position is considered to be peripheral. So if you studied War Games and you memorized all of Ali Sheedy's lines, that knowledge is not productive for you. That knowledge does not lead you closer to the prize. It's only the ability to inhabit this white male space that allows you to move towards the prize. Another spot in the novel where I thought this was especially kind of interesting and it made me really disappointed was the part of the novel where there's a discovery that Blade Runner, the world of Blade Runner, is going to be essential to finding the next key, the next step on the way to the Easter egg. And I was like pumped because I love Blade Runner. I teach it in my film class. I've seen it a million times. And my immediate thought was, oh, this is going to be the chance where Wade's going to be asked to step into the role of perhaps one of the replicants. Wade even says, oh, maybe I'm going to be Rachel and I'm going to have to know all the correct answers that she gives when she's being tested to see if she's a replicant. And instead, when Wade arrives at the place where he's supposed to find the key, all he does is shoot up a bunch of replicant soldiers and then reach the Voight-Kampff machine from the film, touch it, and then he wins. Like, you found the MacGuffin, and now you get to take the next step. So we introduced this text that revolves around questions of identity and the other and who kind of counts and gets the right to exist, within that particular world. And then when we pull that world into the world of Ready Player One, instead of engaging with those issues, we just kind of take the surface level stuff. Like, I want to be Deckard with a big gun blasting all of the replicants away, and we dispense with grappling with any of the themes of the text itself. All right, so that brings us to H, who I mentioned earlier. Wade's best friend H is a black lesbian woman who passes as a young straight white male in the Oasis because she has discovered that it is only by hiding her real world identity that she will be afforded the kind of respect and privilege in her community that her skills as a gamer should afford her naturally. So for example, she explains to Wade that her mother has taught her from a very young age that passing as white and male is the key to a black woman's success in a world where people are, people are expected to conform to a particular image of what the virtual world is supposed to look like. So even in this oasis where we've dispensed with the trappings of reality and we're all kind of collaborating together in this virtual space, the body still really matters and the identity that you present really matters, such that H's mother was unable to find work in the oasis until she changed her appearance to become white and male. And so H follows the same road. When Wade reacts to H's revelation, his first instinct is to disbelieve her confession because he cannot imagine that the person who is as hardcore and pro as H could possibly be in reality this other type of body. So I'm going to read a quote from the novel. Wade says, "Christ, H, I knew you were hiding something, but I never imagined..." "What?" she asked a bit defensively. "You never imagined what?" "That the famous H, renowned egg hunter and the most feared and ruthless arena combatant in the entire Oasis, was, in reality, And then H says, "A fat black chick?" And Wade says, "I was going to say young African-American woman." So in this exchange, Wade tries to demonstrate his comfort with H because he wants to seem woke, right? And so he doesn't want to use the wrong vocabulary. And he decides that young African-American woman sounds less harsh than fat black chick. But I think it's really important for us to note that no matter what language that he uses, Wade is still making the assumption that it is impossible for either a young African-American woman or a fat black chick to be the most feared and ruthless arena combatant in all of the Oasis. A little later on, we stick with Wade as he processes this revelation. And instead of focusing on what H had to go through in order to be successful, like what she had to compromise and give up about herself in order to be successful in this online space, instead of thinking about that, we stick with Wade as he processes this new news. And here's another quote from the novel. Wade says, "A wave of emotion washed over me. Shock gave way to a sense of betrayal. How could she, deceive me all these years? I felt my face flush with embarrassment as I remembered all of the adolescent intimacies I'd shared with H. A person I'd trusted implicitly, someone I thought I knew." This is me again now. Wade feels essentially no empathy for H's dilemma. Instead, he takes it as an affront to himself before ultimately deciding that the best thing for their friendship would be for him to move on and forget all about her revelation. So he says that he forgives H for the sin of her deception, and when she offers to give him an explanation and to talk about, here's what my mother told me about her experience, he says, it doesn't really matter. So a quote from the novel again. There's a reason I never told you, And then Wade says, and I'm sure it's a good one, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't? Of course not. You're my best friend, H, my only friend, to be honest. Well, I still want to explain. Okay, but can it wait until we're in the air? I said, we've got a long way to travel. In this conversation, Wade confuses the notion that H's race and gender and sexuality don't matter to him with the notion that they do not matter generally. It seems obvious that H's race and gender matter a great deal to her and that she has predicated her entire virtual life on the false claim to a particular racialized and gendered position. Indeed, H's insistence on telling her story despite Wade's protestations that her reasons don't matter suggests that she wants to finally be able to tell someone her story for her sake, not because she feels the need to justify her actions to Wade. So in the end, though, Wade decides to pretend this revelation never happened at all. Another quote from the novel, even though I now knew H was actually a female in real life, her avatar was still male, so I decided to continue to refer to him as such. In other words, Wade's claim that he is comfortable with H no matter what kind of body she wears in the real world is apparently untrue because he's unable to cope with or adjust to her revealed femaleness. So he stuffs her body back into the virtual closet for the sake of his own comfort, thereby verifying H's theory that she must hide herself to make and keep friends in the oasis. In conclusion, novels like Ready Player One provide insight into the world of gaming, and this is really important because we're sitting in this time where gamers are kind of poised to take over the world. Gamification is becoming the Silicon Valley buzzword of the day, and gaming is being touted as a hot new marketing strategy, a productivity boost in the workplace, a way to educate our children, a way for politicians to reach their constituencies, and even a way that activists are raising awareness about issues via serious games. And so if we're using games for all of these purposes, then we need to question how gamers are imagined in the popular culture, who is imagined to have access to the cultural capital that gaming provides. And Ready Player One is a window into how the construction of the gamer identity came to be a performance of this particular white masculinity, even as it kind of touts this utopian vision of inclusion for everyone. What Ready Player One shows us is that anyone can be included in the online space so long as they agree to participate in the same manner as a white male gamer would. And I think one of the things that has kind of reinforced this for us after the release of Ready Player One was Gamergate, where people who insisted on occupying space in gamer culture and have different bodies while doing so, how dare they, right, ended up facing a lot of harassment and abuse. So with that in mind, I guess I would like to open up this time for questions from all of you. Real quick before you guys ask questions, so how many of you guys did read Ready Player One as a part of the first year? Okay, so sorry, I guess I just totally spoiled it for all of you. I won't spoil too much about the movie, but from what I've seen from some of the marketing materials, I think some of the stuff around H is changed. So it will be interesting to see how the movie deals with that topic and whether they are kind of questioning the logic that Ernest Cline has set up in his novel or whether they're leaning into it. So I am still curious to see the movie, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say about the book or the movie or about gaming in general.
All right, thank you, Megan, for your talk. Do we have any questions from the group? All right, Trevor.
One of the elements I found pretty cheesy about the book was the romance of Wade and Artemis, and can you kind of speak to that romantic element as a part of your overall argument that you talked about in your presentation today?
Okay, so I briefly mentioned Artemis, who's like the rival egg hunter to Wade, and their romance story is like pretty much every romantic comedy where at first they're rivals and then they get thrown together and have to work together in order to solve some puzzles, and then by the end Artemis has been won over by Wade's persistence. So at one point in the novel she breaks up with him and says, you know, our partnership is distracting me from the hunt for the Easter egg and I can't have that, so we're going to go ahead and separate. And Wade does not accept this, and he does 1,000 grand gestures. He says, I had virtual flowers delivered to her online, and I stood outside of her virtual house with the boombox in the air playing the song like in Say Anything. And like all of these kind of, if I just prove to her how devoted I am, then eventually she will decide that I'm the one for her. And what I think is really interesting about that dynamic is it demonstrates the logic of gaming being applied to relationships. So in a video game, if you fail to make the jump from one platform or another, you don't give up and decide to find another platform with whom you are more compatible. You try again and again and again, and your persistence is rewarded by having you be able to finally achieve the objective. Within Ready Player One, romance is sort of treated in a similar gamified way. It's destiny that Wade and Artemis are going to get together. Wade just has to find the correct sequence of events that will, like he has to push the right buttons or input the right code into Artemis, and then she will realize the truth, which is that they belong together. To bring it back around to things like Gamergate, I think it's also interesting that I guess you could call it a form of activism, or at least that's how Gamergate tried to present itself, as online activism for the prevention of censorship and ethics in games journalism. But what made Gamergate really interesting as an online movement was exactly how gamified it was. Gamergate participants kind of referred to themselves as fighting bosses online, and each little tweet or abusive message was treated as, you know, we're chipping away at the health or the HP of this boss. And if only we can all kind of come together as gamers and strategize and figure out kind of the best way to game the system of social media, then we will be successful. And so one of the things I think Ready Player One kind of warns us about is, if you look at everything as though it is a game, then you might just be ignoring the way that that game has material effects on other people's lives. For Wade, the Oasis is a place where he can be the kind of person he wants to be and have the kind of adventures that he wants to have, and, you know, connect with the types of texts that have been telling him his whole life that he is the special chosen one and that he is the hero of his own story. But if other people want to access that game, then they have to make some choices about their life. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think the romantic story kind of shows that same type of thinking, that, you know, just as I am central in the story of the game, I am central in the story of my romance, and H's agency isn't really relevant. It's more of a matter of, will Wade succeed or fail, not is Artemis attracted to Wade. Did that answer your question?
All
Yeah.
right.
Thank you, Megan, for your talk. So as a fellow Englishy person, I wonder if, you know, whenever I teach this novel, I always tell students I have a love-hate relationship to this novel. But I'm all into about like reparative reading. So like, is there one takeaway from the novel that you can say like this is what the novel is good for, or good with, or you know, that, you know, is there a positive out of all of the shambles?
Yeah. I mean, okay, so let me confess, when this book first came out, I read it, I super enjoyed it. I was one of the people who very smugly pointed out, like, I get that reference that was just made. And like, that's a really good feeling. How how do I want to say? I think that what the novel thinks it's doing is providing a space for people who maybe didn't get the chance in their everyday life to geek out about these movies and video games. Like, we can all come together in this space and geek out together. And I guess my issue with the novel is that I, as a female reader, kind of simultaneously felt beckoned to join that community because I was, along with Wade, solving the puzzles, and I understood I know what Qbert is, so when he shows up in the book, I'm like, yes, all right, I'm like one step closer. But then the way that maybe the person that I would want to identify with in the text, Artemis, gets so sidelined over the course of the quest and kind of goes from being a valid competitor, someone who might actually beat Wade out, to his kind of like support class character who's just helping from outside and encouraging. And so that just turned into another criticism, didn't it? Okay, so maybe here's one thing that I think that is really great about the novel. I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase this. It creates this world where cooperation and strategic thinking and a belief in the common good is actually used by a collective of people to defeat this evil corporation. And like the part of me that was raised by parents in a labor union is like really excited about that. I guess I just want to caution people from kind of believing that this geek collective is obviously going to save the world from every social ill, because the way that this geek collective wins the day ends up reinforcing some other hierarchical systems. So I love the story of like taking those cheating, money-grubbing IOI representatives and beating them with our ingenuity and our technical wizardry. Like, I love that story. It's just the way that the ragtag band of misfits is portrayed, and which misfits are the misfits that matter and which misfits are the ones in the periphery that I think we need to attend to. Related note, there's a podcast called 372 Pages, which is about two comedians. One of them is one of the guys from Mystery Science Theater 3000, if you ever used to watch that old show. And they are reading through Ready Player One and kind of commenting on it as they go. And I think they have a very similar experience where they're like, oh, I remember Lady Hawk, that movie was great. And then, oh, I can't believe that they said this, like, that is so un-PC or offensive. But then, oh, but I also recognize Tetris, like, yay. And so kind of that back and forth experience of being kind of sucked into the world of the novel and enjoying the nostalgia, and then getting pushed back out of it by a character who's just so wrapped up in their own story and their own subject position that they can't imagine anyone else's subject position.
Hi, thank you. I'm wondering if sort of basically, are you excited for the movie, and what do you think Spielberg's going to do with this?
Yeah, I mean, so for one, I think it's really interesting that Spielberg is directing it, because so many of the touchstones within the novel were Spielberg movies. So, well, that's true. That's a good point. But I don't know. I worry that the movie is going to be kind of like a victory lap more than anything else. Like, it's going to be an indulgence where we get to throw up all of these cool references on the screen, and then even those areas of the text where we become a little bit of self-aware and we start to look at things from Artemis's perspective or H's perspective, I worry that those parts are going to fall away by virtue of it being a movie, and we're all going to be asked to identify with Wade's point of view. I also worry about the visual design of the Oasis, where everyone is kind of like an anime person. When I was reading the novel, to me, the point of the Oasis was that it's photorealistic and that you can really seem to be whoever it is you want to be, not seem to be a cartoon character with certain features. And so I worry about how that idea of the Oasis is going to shift. Like in the novel, the Oasis is more real than real life. It's the place where everyone works. It's the place where everyone goes to school. It's the place that matters. And the physical world is just the place that keeps your body alive so that you can go into the Oasis, because the Oasis is reality. And I worry that in the movie version, if the Oasis just becomes this really fun, immersive video game, but it doesn't have that reality of groundedness, then it's going to be really easy for audiences to kind of dismiss the importance of who matters within that world, because, oh, that world's just a game. So if you don't feel like you belong, then just go play a different game.
Thank you for a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I love the way that you focused on embodiment and performance in the avatars. And I wonder if you could speak to the way that anyone might disagree with this reading, but it seemed to me that Artemis was really praised for her decision to choose an avatar that matched her quote unquote unconventional body type, versus H is not praised for not choosing the more authentic avatar that represents the way that she really looks.
Yeah, okay, so Artemis in the novel is praised as being, I think the word they use is like Rubenesque. So, and to Wade, it's like a mark of her authenticity and her realness that she doesn't just choose like a Barbie style supermodel avatar for herself. Which is ironic because Wade kind of does. Like in the novel, Wade's real world body is overweight and out of shape, and in the Oasis, he looks like himself, but like the fit, cool version of himself. And so, yeah, I think that speaks to the kind of levels of access that people have in the Oasis. So Wade is allowed to aesthetically upgrade himself because it's assumed that he is authentic in this space. Like, you're a white guy and you're being yourself. And so any cosmetic changes that you make are inconsequential, and we just accept that. With Artemis, we see many female avatars in the space who do that same thing, who kind of upgrade their body according to the beauty standards, and they are dismissed as fakers and liars. But Artemis is special because she is, well, conventionally beautiful in a different way that stands out, and so that uniqueness is praised. So she can have access to authenticity, but only like via this certain avenue. And then for H, authenticity, at least according to H's story, isn't possible in a realistic body because presumably H, like her mother, wouldn't be able to get work in the Oasis, wouldn't be allowed to achieve success as a pro gamer if she presented as she really was. And so for her, authenticity means passing. And if I can present myself in such a way where I'm not drawing attention to my body at all, then I will be allowed to exist in this space. So, you know, that would be like the least level of access, where in order to be authentic, you have to be inauthentic, and time and space fold in on themselves, and everything is upside down.
All right. So I wanted to thank Dr. Condis again for coming out and talking about Ready Player One. I also wanted to point out that those of us who work in pop culture often critique things at a high level, but that doesn't mean that we don't love them at the same time. I like to go, Anita Sarkeesian says it a lot on Feminist Frequency, her blog, that it's necessary for us to critique the media that we love in order to have a critical distance. And I think, I'm not going to speak for all the speakers who are here, but that's kind of where I'm at as a scholar and creator as well. So Thank you. And she will be teaching a twine workshop this afternoon. So if you want to learn how to make interactive stories or simple games, that would be a great workshop to come back to. Next up, we'll have Dr. Edmond Chang. And that will start at 10 o'clock, so we have about a 10-minute break until then. So thank you all for coming, and let's give Megan a hand.
Thank you.